Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest. Absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. This week I want to change things up just a little bit. I've been reading every week or referencing every week a chapter from my book, Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People. And I have pretty much gotten through the basic maladies and herbs for those maladies. And some of the information in the later chapters is much more about herbal homesteading, incorporating herbs into your farm, into your permaculture systems. And it doesn't convey so well over radio. You're just going to need to get the book. And it's been a very well received book. I mean, it's got some really good reviews on Amazon. So that book again, Herbal Medicine for Preppers, Homesteaders, and Permaculture People, is available through Amazon or on my blog. I'll send you the ebook, that's southernappalachianherbs.blogspot.com, or on my Substack, Judson Carroll Master Herbalist. But the more recent book I've written is Christian Herbal Medicine, and it's not just a book of herbal medicine practice, how to use herbs, what herbs are useful for. It's also a book about history of the development of herbal medicine really over the last 2,000 plus years. And I want to give you a little bit of an idea in this week's show, maybe I'll do a little more next week, about this book because it is, I think, a very interesting, fascinating history. I really enjoyed writing it, and the people who have read it so far have really enjoyed it, really raved about it, really talked about all kinds of interesting figures in history, interesting events in history, interesting things that they were not taught in school. And that's not only, high school history class or college history class, but herbal schools, schools that teach herbal medicine, often really know nothing of the tradition of herbal medicine, especially from the time after the fall of Rome through the Middle Ages. And it really is just a central part of not only the history of herbal medicine, but the history of Western culture and medicine as it's practiced today. Modern medicine has its roots 100% in herbal medicine as it developed over the last 2,000 years. So, but before we get into that, another really popular feature that I started a couple of weeks ago on the show has been my little 2-minute Latin lessons. People are enjoying it. It's Latin's a fun language, really, if you don't let it overwhelm you. Last week, I introduced to you the words hortus and hortulus. Hortus is a garden. Hortulus is a gardener. It's from where we get the word horticulture. So similarly, let's just kind of expand upon that. In Latin, a farmer is an agricola, and his field is an ager. That's where we get the word agriculture. So that's your little Latin tip. Now you can either be a hortulus or an agricola, and you can have a hortus or an ager. And a farm is actually a fundus. So it gets a little different just in that aspect of that concept. I mean, you're talking a field in which the farmer farms is an ager, but the farm itself is a fundus. I don't know why that is, but that's what the that's what the Romans said, and that's how they liked it. So let's get into this week's show. All right, so the new book is uh, Christian Herbal Medicine: History and Practice. And in the first chapter, I talk all about the pre-Christian history of herbal medicine. I'm just going to briefly skim this. I'm not going to get into the weeds with it. But the oldest recorded, actually written, carved in stone tablet sources of record we have for herbal medicine, they go back to ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Babylon. We're talking, the oldest one is Sumerian, and it was written in 2100 BC. Okay, so that's more than 4,000 years ago. Actually, the history of herbal medicine goes back far beyond that. They have discovered whether it's, Otzi the Bogman. He was a mummified primitive man they found in a peat bog. And, when they brought him out, he had a bag of herbal medicine on him, including several medicinal mushrooms. They have found little stores where different native groups um, made, you know, basically medicine bags. They took medicinal herbs for whatever they needed and put them in a pouch or rolled them up in a fur or whatever and stored them away in a nook of a cave. I mean, these have been found everywhere there's human civilization. And, some actually are more than 60,000 years old. 60,000 years ago, our ancestors had a working, fairly sophisticated knowledge of herbal medicine. If we're looking at specifically Christian history, well, first place we're going to turn to is the Bible, and we're looking at the ancient Jewish tradition. There really are not a lot of herbs that are named in the Bible. I mean, they talk about the various mints and such that would be used for a tithe. They talk about wormwood mainly as an analogy. Wormwood is very bitter. And so when they talk of wormwood, they're talking about bitterness. There were bitter herbs that were eaten in the Passover, for instance. But there is a really strong tradition of ancient Hebrew Jewish herbal medicine. And you can find that written in extra biblical books, I mean, the Torah and the Talmud, and you have various other documents. There's a really interesting book. It's called the Encyclopedia Judaica. You can find it online, a lot of excerpts from it. It's a really nice history and collection of the Jewish writings, just really going back thousands of years. And I found an entry there. It was in the Book of Jubilees. It says that the angels revealed various remedies to Noah, and he wrote them down in a book. Asaph the physician adds that Noah, having been taught by the angel Raphael the remedies obtained from trees, plants, and roots, recorded them in a book which he gave to his son Shem, and which was used by the ancient physicians. Apparently, in olden times, books of remedies were common among the people. Of them mentioned by Maimonides, I guess I can't pronounce that name, as having supposedly been written by Solomon. And if you know your Bible, you know Solomon was given knowledge of all plants and medicines, actually. Solomon supposed to have written a book of herbal medicine, and the book was pretty much lost during by the order of Hezekiah, the king of Judah. There's a really interesting history in all that. The Jewish tradition does have many herbal medicines in it, and it is very old, very ancient. It's also very interesting that Raphael the archangel is the one that was said to have given Moses the knowledge of herbs, and of course the Holy Spirit was to have given the knowledge of herbs to Solomon. You may remember there's a story in the Bible where a man who was lame came to Jesus, and he said he couldn't get into the pool when the waters were troubled because he couldn't kind of fight his way in with among all the other invalids, you know. And Jesus healed him, of course. And that story is actually very interesting because it's an ancient Jewish legend that says that the archangel Raphael was sort of God's, he's a messenger angel. That's what archangels are, basically. And that was God's representative for healing. And he would actually trouble the waters of this pool. I think it was at Siloam. Uh, it's a legend. The waters were stirred by some force, and people who would get into the waters were healed. And according to the ancient Hebrew tradition, it was the archangel that did that. So you'll actually see him appearing several times medicinally in the Bible. There's a book that is included in most traditional Bibles. It's in the Catholic Bible. If you have the old Douay Rheims, which was, popular among both Protestants and Catholics, you will find the Book of Tobit, and there's a wonderful story there about how that archangel brings a remedy that heals blindness. So it was left out of some more modern Bibles because some people have a problem with the idea of angels interacting with humans. I don't know why, because throughout the Bible it says God's angels, are messengers, are appearing to Mary, telling her she's going to become pregnant, are doing all kinds of things, taking messages from the earth to God and back and forth. I mean, you can look in the book of Revelations, you can look in any Protestant Bible, and you are going to see the angels doing many things as workers essentially for God. And that tradition is very much wrapped up in the Hebrew, the Jewish tradition of herbal medicine and early Christian medicine. And that's something that I find fascinating. I think it's really pretty cool, actually, just to put it mildly. But, of course, everybody knows the stories of persecution of the Jewish people being conquered and enslaved by the Babylonians, or being enslaved by the Egyptians, or even through the Holocaust, obviously. They had to move around a lot. Well, it seems that pretty much everywhere they went, they learned that areas, that region, that culture's herbal medicine tradition. Really, the most intact record we still have of that is the Ashkenazi Jews. They were the ones that had sought refuge in the Roman Empire after the fall of Jerusalem. From that point, they moved up into Central Europe, really into France and Germany, as fall of the Roman Empire. You know your history. The barbarians really sacked everything. Things became very violent in that area from the Aryan peoples' warlord tradition. The Ashkenazi Jews, pretty much during that period, began migrating toward Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Ukraine, into Russia. And they're the ones from whom we have a lot of the more traditional Jewish traditions of today. They're the ones who speak Yiddish. They're the ones that came over in large waves of immigration to America. So where you have, Jewish neighborhoods from Eastern Central Europe, European ancestry, they are of the Ashkenazi heritage. Uh, they have a very strong tradition of herbal medicine that was really celebrated and preserved throughout the years. There's only, unfortunately, one book written in English that I've been able to find that really tells about that. It's called Ashkenazi Herbalism. It's by Deatra Cohen and Adam Siegel. Its subtitle is Rediscovering the Herbal Tradition of Eastern European Jews. And it's a very good book. It's got a materia medica in there. It talks about both the traditional and the modern use of these herbs. Much of the information does come from Poland. And as I told you recently, um, Sophie Horowitz Nab, Hodorowicz Nab, I cannot pronounce her name. Her book on Polish herbalism really interestingly parallels this. The whole area of Central Europe, they had their own folk herbal traditions, before the Holy Roman Empire and before the Ashkenazi Jews got there. they also learned a great deal from the Ashkenazi Jews and from the monastic medicine. The next like big change after that, after the Jewish tradition, really centers around Rome. Obviously, the early church was based in Rome. The Rome had its own herbal medicine tradition. Greece and Rome were the main centers of learning and herbalism. What they did not necessarily have was a viewpoint of medicine being for the common man, especially in Rome. Rome was very militaristic. Roman doctors treated Roman officials, the wealthy people in Rome, and the soldiers in Rome. The poor people of Rome did not have much access to anything other than their own folk medicine. So whereas, a soldier or a Caesar would have just an excellent physician like, Galen or somebody who had knowledge of hundreds or thousands of plants and modern surgical techniques and everything. The average person had very little access to that, and the foreigner had basically none. So as the Jews move into Rome, pre-Christian era, they began opening little hostels, almost like little hotels. They would open their homes to travelers. And they also had a concept of universal charity, and they would take care of the sick. In the early Christian area, the Christians who really began establishing themselves in Rome did the same thing. And so the next big force in the history of herbal medicine is the early Christian era. See, in Rome, they had a tradition of not necessarily valuing all of their children. Unwanted children were just thrown on the trash heap to die, and a lot of them be taken and raised as slaves and sold. And so Rome not only did not have a strong tradition of caring for foreigners or the poor, they weren't all that good for caring for their own children. The early church was grown by Christians adopting Roman children. While the Romans were feeding Christians to lions, torturing them to death, trying to persecute and absolutely eradicate the faith, the Roman Christians of various nationalities, those that lived in Rome, were adopting the very children of the Romans and raising them as Christians. That eventually caused the Roman people to accept Christianity. It said the Romans said, see how they love each other, see how they take care of each other. Well, the other thing the early church did was open hostels like the Jews had and take in anyone sick and try to save them, try to make them healthy. They used prayer, of course, but they also used herbs. For a while, there was a little controversy over whether it should be prayer only or prayer and herbs, and eventually they settled on the very obvious notion that if God created the herbs, He created them for our good, and they shouldn't be left by the wayside. So they actually had these legions of strong, healthy men who would go out throughout the town and find anyone who was sick or disabled in any way and carry them in. They would be treated, they would be given full charity and hospitality and medicine. That was a huge way the church grew. It one of the main defining times was during a plague when it said that by the early Christian writers, the bishops and such at the time, that the pagan Romans just left their sick to die and didn't even bury them, just left them on the streets. They were so afraid of catching what they didn't understand to be a virus. The Christians went out and gathered all those people and brought them in and healed them. And in the end, Christianity became the dominant religion of Rome due to charity, love, and herbal medicine. I mean, it was the universal brotherhood, the kindness, the miraculous healing of the early Christian church that established Christianity in the world, really. And time goes on. You got about a 300-year period in there between then and the fall of Rome. Then comes the man who would become the Emperor Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor, Charlemagne the Great. He was actually of Germanic heritage. His mother was Christian. She had convinced his father to become Christian. They were the heads of the biggest like warlord force tribe. He conquered all the other barbaric tribes and became the emperor of Rome. And from then on, not only was Christianity legal as it had been for a while at that point, but it became, if you were a Roman citizen, you were Christian. And it's began the spread of the church throughout the world. He was very interested in the well-being of the Roman people. He issued the Capitulare, which was a large document commanding, essentially, that gardens be planted. He wanted gardens for food and he wanted gardens for medicine. During the same time, the monastic communities were forming, which were the Benedictines. One of the rules of the Benedictine order is care for the sick. Saint Benedict wrote, "Care of the sick must rank above and before all else, so that they may be truly served as Christ. For he said, I was sick and you visited me, and what you did for one of the least of these brothers, you did for me." They absolutely prioritized the care of the sick. They planted what were called physic gardens. The physic gardens contained in those gardens the herbs that the Holy Roman Emperor had mandated be grown. And they opened charitable hospitals. They opened charitable hospitals. They had schools. They spread monasteries throughout Central Europe, well into England, into Ireland. Those were the hospitals for over 1,000 years. I mean, for over 1,000 years, every single hospital in Europe was operated by the Catholic Church, run by monks and nuns. They were herbalists. They were growing herbs in their gardens. They were treating people with herbs. That spread the faith of Christianity more than just about anything. I mean, it's one thing for an emperor to say, okay, now that you're in my country, you have to obey my rules. All right, that doesn't convince a whole lot of people. I mean, people will go through the motions. For these monks to actually leave everything, live in absolute poverty, go out into the wilderness, and I mean, it was wild for a long time. And when we get into the story of like Paracelsus, Theophrastus, the monastery where he grew up, where his father was actually the physician in the town. You're talking, this is in what is now modern Germany. I mean, we think of it as always being a fairly sophisticated place. In this era, which was not that long ago, it was warlords and kings fighting over things, bandits, what we almost call pirates now. I mean, highway robbers. The monk that founded the monastery was killed. I mean, he was murdered for what they thought to be a gold crucifix. I mean, it was a rough life these people had, and they went out in absolute service to care for people. We read about the spread of the monastic medicine into Poland, throughout Germany. Well, in Russia, there's both the Catholic and the Orthodox tradition of monastic medicine in Russia before the Communist Revolution, of course. We see that the very first saint of herbal medicine was an Irish monk, Saint Fiacre. Ireland, after the fall of Rome, was the center of knowledge and learning and medicine in the entire civilized world. Eventually, a lot of Viking invasions and disruptions that kind of moved from Ireland over to France. The second patron saint of herbal medicine is Saint Gertrude. She was in Belgium. She was born like right on the border of France and Belgium. So we can really see where the medicine moved. The first medical school in the entire world, official medical school, was formed in Italy by a Catholic, a Jew, and an Arab, who all brought their herbal medicine traditions together to teach. But going back to the physic gardens of the Benedictines and the Carmelites and various ones, they have Latin names. All the herbs will end in officinalis. That means they were the official herbs of the officina. Officina was their apothecary. They used so many herbs that we use today. They used marshmallow, that's Althea officinalis, bug loss, asparagus even. That's Asparagus officinalis. It's very good for kidney stones and bladder issues. European bistwort, borage, butterfly bush, pot marigold, Calengia officinalis. Quinine made its way in over time. That came through the Jesuits after the Spanish had colonized South America. They discovered quinine. Scurvy grass. There was a seaweed that's Carolina officinalis, Cornelian cherry, oxney, hound's tongue, eyebright, fumitory, goat's rue, hedge hyssop, regular hyssop, jasmine, lovage, gromwell, magnolia even eventually got in there. Meliot lemon balm, mulberry, watercress, peony, pellitory, lungwort, rhubarb found its way in over time via Asia. Roses, apothecary rose is actually what it's called. Rosemary, sage, burnet, soapwort, cuttlefish, hedge mustard, bass sponge, betony, snowbell, comfrey, dandelion, valerian, vervain, speedwell, and ginger. Another one that came in from the east. All of these eventually became in to the officina, and those that could were grown on site. Those that they couldn't were, traded for. These medicines were grown by the monks and used in the free practice charitable hospitals of medical care throughout Europe. I mean, it's a fascinating history, and many of these monasteries are still there today. My friend Jolanta Wittib recently went to France. She visited one of these beautiful old monasteries, and their hospital beds. I mean, these are just incredible, Gothic cathedrals, and even the hospital beds had little chambers with wood carvings of crucifixes and saints and different religious images, uh, stained glass windows that show Bible stories, in a pre-literate time. That's how people were communicated. The messages of the Bible were through visual images. And much of that was beautiful stained glass and beautiful religious icons, paintings, and they're still there today. You can go and see and learn about the treatments they use in France and Germany and Belgium, all over. Many of the old colleges and okay, you probably all seen Downton Abbey, right? Well, in England, before King Henry decided to stop cutting off his wife's heads and just start his own religion, those were abbeys. Those were actual abbeys, and abbeys where a bunch of nuns live, right? Those were actual working hospitals and universities run by the Catholic Church. And the main force of medicine in England was the Benedictines. I mean, every bit of the medical tradition, the herbal tradition in England, the training of doctors was done in these church run universities well into the 1500s. Then the Anglican churches took over those same universities and those same buildings, those same hospitals, and ran it really into the modern era. So in the capitulaire, which I mentioned before, I told you that Charlemagne or Charles the Great or whatever you want to call him, who actually is not officially a saint, by the way, so you can call him by any title you like. He said in chapter 70, he said, it is our wish that they should have in their gardens all kinds of plants, including lily, roses, fenugreek, cosmere, sage, rue, southernwood, cucumbers, pumpkins, gourds, kidney beans, cumin, rosemary, caraway, chickpea, squill, which is an old vegetable that has fallen out of favor, probably because it has such an odd name. Gladiolas, tarragon, anise, colocynth, chicory. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. He literally mandated, we should say, that people grow gardens. And his family's tutor was the abbot Walafrid Strabo. Walafrid Strabo, as I've mentioned before, wrote Hortulus, the first herbal written by an educated man after the fall of the Roman Empire. He wrote of Charlemagne. He said Charles was the keenest of all kings to seek out and support wise men so they might philosophize with all delight. Almost all the kingdom entrusted to him by God was so foggy and almost blind, but he made it luminous with new rays of knowledge, almost unknown to this barbarous land, with God lighting the way so it could see. But now studies are growing weak, and the light of wisdom, because it is less loved, grows rarer among most people. So, in the opinion of Walfrid Strabo, writing in 817 AD, the era of Charlemagne was the great shining light of knowledge and interest in the sciences, and especially medicine and horticulture and agriculture in the Roman Empire. Durable traditions of Rome, as it mixed with the folk medicines of these different cultures where the monasteries went, just became enriched just incredibly over what we're often taught in school was like basically the Dark Ages, a time of ignorance. It was a time of such discovery and incredible advances in medicine. You take, we'll say, the third patron saint of herbal medicine, Saint Hildegard von Bingen. I've done a whole show on her. Anyway, she wrote two books on herbal medicine. She was a visionary. She was very sickly as a child. She was often blind at periods of time. She had very little education, but she was bedridden. She was given to the care of the Benedictines. They took care of her as best they could, but she was just a very sickly child. She began having visions of what she called the voice of the living light. Literally, God was speaking to her, either one on one or through angels or whatever. She never really got into specifics. She said it was the voice of the living light and giving her the knowledge of the nature of diseases. I mean, she described cancer, she described viruses, she described germ theory, essentially, in 1100, I mean, the late 1000s in ways that no one would understand until they could see things under microscopes hundreds of years later. She was given, I would call it the wisdom of Solomon. I mean, her books on herbal medicine are both spiritual and physical. She says there's essentially a spiritual cause for every disease, which is actually, the biblical viewpoint that through sin, death entered the world, through sin, sickness entered the world. So there's a spiritual component to every ailment. And as God created all things and God created the herbal cures to help heal the physical, there's also this aspect of spiritual healing. So a lot of her herbal medicine, her cures are seen very differently. I mean, this is far more spiritually based than, the tradition of Greece and Rome. This is not Dioscorides. This is not Galen talking about scientific experiment. This is medicine as presented through the eyes of a spiritual visionary. So it does take a lot of often meditation prayer to really understand what she's saying to us. But she introduced many plants into the monastic medicine, and at the time, I mean, she was called the Sibyl of the Rhone, the Sibyl of the Rhone. Sibyl was an ancient seer, visionary. People would go to for words of wisdom. Such people came from all over Europe for her counsel. She was celebrated by popes. She was celebrated by the bishops. I mean, people have this concept of women in the Middle Ages, especially in the Catholic Church, as being not allowed to speak in church or being given very subservient roles. Not Saint Hildegard. Saint Hildegard was encouraged to go and speak in churches, to go all over the area she could travel from about age 40 on. She said God gave her enough strength to do it, but she was always sickly and had issues, but she traveled as far as she could, speaking to as many people as she could, the wealthy, the kings, the common people, and fostered religious orders. She became the abbess of her order, and she helped start other religious orders that would care for the sick and teach people. And she's, anyone who thinks there were no feminists in the Catholic Church or in Christianity in general in the 1000s should read Saint Hildegard and what was written of Saint Hildegard at the time. She's incredibly inspiring, and some of the things she wrote are just uh, almost unutterably beautiful. Her vision of man and nature in unity as part of God's plan, and when we're out of balance, when we're out of unity, that's when we're getting sick. That's when we're screwing things up. Her works are incredible, and like I said, I've done an entire show on her, and I'm just a huge fan. I mean, she's basically uh, one of my favorite saints. So from Walfrid Strabo's Hortulus, written in the 800s, to St. Hildegard's Physica and such, written in the 1000s, we've got a incredible insight into the monastic medicine. And I absolutely recommend both of those books for your shelf, without a doubt. So the next thing come along that's really important is the first medical school. You know, I referenced this earlier. It's the medical school at Salerno. And there's an article in Hectoin International. It's a medical journal. I found some really good information on there from a professor at Baylor University, James Markham. He says the nascence or beginning of the Scola Medica Salernitana, the medical school at Salerno, on the Italian southwest coast is shrouded in myth and controversy. According to one tradition, the school's beginning dates to Parmenides, a pre-Socratic philosopher who in 540 BC founded a medical school at the Greek colony of Elea, located there. According to another tradition, the school's origin involved the labor of four founders: Pontius, a Greek; Salernus, a Latin; Adela, an Arab; and Elinus, a Jew, each representing the various cultural influences on the school throughout its history. And it is really fascinating. Very likely there was a Greek, medical school there at one time, and very likely that's why these four men went there to found the school. Of course, according to legend, they all came there by chance, pretty much guided by the hand of God. It's fascinating. I mean, obviously, and the influence on the school went back and forth. It was very much dominated by the Greeks at times. Other times, it was dominated by the Arabs. The Arabs really embraced the tradition of Galen. There's always a little, tension there between the Hippocratic tradition and the Galenic tradition. But after the Charlemagne became the Holy Roman Emperor, the Romans dominated, and it became the leading medical school in the entire world, helping to preserve the Greek tradition, the Arab tradition, the Jewish tradition, and all this monastic medicine that was now becoming so much a huge part of medicine, of herbal medicine, and just medicine in general. I mean, even down to surgeries and setting bones and all kinds of stuff. That was all part of medicine at the time, and herbs were essentially the only pharmaceuticals. I mean, those were the only medicines people had were plant-based, or later, especially Paracelsus and such began bringing in a lot of minerals and such as that. But that really is, that is the history of herbal medicine from about 1 AD to 1500. I mean, our history book, as taught in modern times, seem to just kind of erase that whole period as if nothing interesting happened then. It was just a time of, barbarism and backwoods folks. It was not, especially in terms of art, in terms of music, in terms of medicine, in terms of architecture. I mean, it was an absolute magnificent time. I mean, it was just incredible. And as herbalists, it is so rich. The history is so rich for us. So I hope you've enjoyed this. Like I said, it was a fun book to write, and I think it will be a very valuable book to have on your shelf, to pass on to your children, to share with friends, so that our history isn't lost. It's very important that our history not be lost, and not be taught in a way that's not true. You'll know the truth, and the truth will set you free, right? So this is the truth, and It's the truth is not a subjective thing. Dates and facts and figures and places and times are real, actual things, and they need to be preserved. So that's my goal in this book. And anyway, like I said, it is fun. So have a great week. I'll see you next time. And boy, it's almost spring. I've got almost spring fever. I'm just itching to get out there and plant that garden. But gotta wait till we get a little closer to that last frost date. But I am champing at the bit, that's for sure. All right, we'll see you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.